Certainly not. The energy targets will not be achieved neither by the legislation. Yeah, the legislation is just the first requirement. As long you do not have the investment which open its operation, yeah, you will not change. You will not change simply anything, and I think it has to be known. However, if I may give one point here on the compensation. The compensation is the tool was developed for the time of growth. You use it in the crisis. Tell to the Romanians that they had to cut 50% the pensions for the people, but they have to compensate the turbine. Sorry, would you agree to cut the pension in your country by 50% and give it to any industrial facility? So I think we have to be very careful due to the crisis with those elements which were excellent in the time of growth, yeah, when you had a surplus. In my very deep view, within the energy mix, you have to get a co-financing. Yeah? The cheap nuclear facility, which is low carbon, has to co-finance the renewable, which has requiring the cost element, in my view. Yeah? So the cost has to be solved in the energy system. And it's one of the elements for each Central Eastern European countries. But certainly the legislation is only one element. The agreement of the local community is the second element. But as long as you do not have the open facility start to produce something, you did nothing. Yeah? And it has to be well known.
I'm looking to the audience now for your comments and questions. Eric.
Thanks, Tim. Eric Drosten from the Zero Emissions Platform. So we're a European technology platform that effectively advises the EU on CCS. And I think you'll find a lot of the discussion that comes up here takes place in our meetings because we have this unusual mix of environmental NGOs, industry, research, and academia. But my question was to pick up on what Tim said. There is even beyond EU targets for reducing emissions a much more important imperative, which is climate change itself, which every day doesn't stop, couldn't care less whether you like it or not, is totally unconcerned by whether you have been approached in a sensitive and genteel manner or not. And I apologize if that sounds strong. I say it as a communicator, so in fact I sympathize with everything that has been said today about how to approach people in dialogue. But if we have this top-down imperative, which is we need to do a certain number of things by certain dates if we're going to meet certain targets, then how would the panel reconcile that with the important discussions and I think valid points that we've made about how you effectively dialogue with people about accepting these low-carbon infrastructure projects, which are immense. They're huge. I think Jeremy Rifkin referred to it as a third industrial revolution. He's not wrong. That's the size and the scale of it. So I guess my question to everyone is, how do you bring those two elements together?
While they're thinking about that very small question you posed, Eric, I'm going to look for further comment question from over there.
I hate to, it's very nice and very constructive dialogue, but I hate to be the devil's advocate. And do we have a case of policy fragmentation, both horizontal and vertical, meaning across domains and across layers of governance? And let me share a small experiment, really small experiment. When I was a child, at 15, I proposed in 1980 to my school director that the physics circle does experiments with solar. The director looked, and this was in Romania, okay? The director looked at my physics teacher and the rest of us who were all Olympics, International Olympics in physics, and said, we can't do that because it's not in the curriculum. Now this is 1980, after the Club of Rome report, when we did realize the limits of growth, after one and in the middle of a second oil crisis, when this was still, at that time, cool. I'm sorry, my experience with high school children in Wallonia is I'm asking them if they know that they can do green energy from their school, and the direct answer is no. We don't do that. We don't actually raise awareness ahead of time for when these children will be the policymakers, the users of energy, and so on. Is this a matter of vertical and horizontal fragmentation? And can we do something about it? Because if we actually plant these little seeds early on, we may have a different story by 2020. My second part of this same thing is, do we have positive, serious, committed policies towards negative carbon infrastructure projects, meaning anything conservation or economy? I mean, I'm looking at this building. It has a nice green label on the outside, but look at how many lights we're using. And I took a tour all the way to the window, and the whole of it uses a whole lot of lights in midday. I looked across. The European Parliament does the exact same thing. And we are the ones who are the #1 in Europe among 540 million people in awareness raising. Thank you.
But I am absolutely sure in one thing: in the crisis, 8,000 billion euro or dollar has been fired within 2 weeks on the speculation market, while 4,000 billion is missing for the next 10 years to make a change, the step change in the energy investment. Yeah, and therefore, to get to that point, I think the major driver has to be the economic growth has to come from the investment, because the investment will provide jobs, the investment will provide the kind of wave, the will to do it. And I think that that's the most important message for the politicians. And the new energy step change will be a low carbon. Either it will be a coal with the carbon capture, either it will be a solar or renewable or biomass, or will be nuclear. But if we don't start, we never ever get there. And I think that's the most important message from my side, to ask for politicians, if they wish to get the economic growth, and if they wish to get to the 21st century, finally give up the 20 and left behind it, I think we have to start it. Thanks.
Okay, clearly the urgency of the matter is there, and we need to have a new energy infrastructure in place as quickly as possible, absolutely. But how we get that energy infrastructure in place matters. And it matters because the more perspectives you bring into the design of the infrastructure that we are putting in place, the better that infrastructure will be, the more resilient it will be, the better informed it will be, and better for the world it will be. The problem that I see is that if you go into the design of our next energy infrastructure with an engineering dominant view, you're going to come out with an engineering dominance outcome. And there's nothing wrong with engineers, but engineers give you solutions that are framed by the questions you pose to them. So once I worked with an engineer, a pipeline engineer, on a giant pipeline, the West East pipeline that cuts across all of China. And he had drawn his pipeline routing as straight as he possibly could, right? Because that's economically what is the most viable, that is physically what's easiest to put in place, keep as few bends in it as possible. Well, it happened to cross the Great Wall 13 times. And it happened to go through several very sensitive habitats. And it happened to contribute to desertification issues. And so it had all these problems with that routing. Now, that pipeline engineer, when we started to pose to him different sets of questions, came up with very different routings that were much better for the environment, in the end better for the engineering, and because we were able to do it before the pipeline went into the ground, better for the economics of the project, because the project was able to keep on road in terms of getting delivery. But so engineers need to be part of the solution finding, but they can't necessarily dominate the solution finding. They need to be in dialogue with others who have other perspectives of what kind of future we're creating. And that's a more solid foundation to be working towards.
Well, just to try to answer your question, which is not an easy one, but there are several. I mean, there are several things that are needed. Some of these things are going to have to happen by default. So technology is going to appear, but I agree with Andrea, and I think there's a framing issue in the engineering approach, which is the way we've always done it before, which is you stick a centrally generated, very large piece of equipment, whether it's a 7 barrage or several nuclear power plants, and the grid then works off that. And I think if we still think in those old ways, that is not an imaginative way of attempting to solve some of the questions we really need to deal with, which are how do we get heat and electricity generation at a local level so the system is efficient rather than the current inefficient system. So we have to, I think, about that whole system change as well that's coming along. Kind of three or four things that maybe that need to be done. Three, rematerializing energy use for people. Okay, I think that's a very important part of this whole debate that has not really been addressed. So our use of energy in everything we do and people, it's invisible to people. So how do we, it's not just putting in smart meters, it's a whole raft of things to try and rematerialize that. So that's one of the engagement struggles. We should engage at multiple levels. I don't think it's just about local sites. And I think we haven't had a dialogue yet in any European country, as far as I know, about whole system energy change. A couple of us were talking about this before we started the session, and I think that there are the scenarios are there now. The engineers and others, the techie people, have worked out how we might reach our 2020 or 2050 targets, and there are kind of some interesting implications of all of those scenarios. But nobody's actually gone to the general public to talk through some of the issues and the stakeholders as well that might be involved in that. And I think that's a challenge. It depends who represents the public. That's not a straightforward thing. And yeah, so those were kind of my three things. Yeah.
Oui, donc je pense qu'effectivement, il y a...
Yes, I do think that at a political level, there is a real responsibility. There is a need to present a global, a consistent picture between the different energy mixes, but also the solutions which are proposed to reduce energetic consumption. And that does include issues regarding grids. How should the grids be developed? Economic issues, well, how can the economic sphere take advantage of this, and how any savings can be redistributed by and large? And also in terms of costs, how can one make sure that what is being proposed by the political level is truly the best and cost effective? And how will that be done, and where? We've lost the debate on social acceptance. If we were to propose a very good solution but in the wrong place, this won't do, because quite clearly people on the spot might or will propose better alternatives, better solutions. So I think there is a political responsibility there to propose a consistent and global approach, a comprehensible approach. And training there, and training and education is essential. And of course, there's a lot to do in terms of informing people, training people. That is something you cannot do on your own. You have to do with the different areas of schooling, of education. And there's the issue of cultural acceptance of what is truly at stake. We need to create trust, because if you accept something, if you accept to make an effort, any change will require an effort. To accept to make such an effort, well, I think everybody is prepared to take that step if they are sure that it's worth it, if they are sure that this will lead to sustainable solutions, to something really worthwhile in the medium and long term. Because in the short term, it will involve an effort, if not a sacrifice. And I think that is where politicians have a role to play, to convey that message, to get people to agree to that message, to be prepared to make the effort. And I think there's a further step, which is the local level, this greater proximity. You can speak to people far more, to the social group, and also to people who are geographically within a certain sphere. Obviously, technical solutions are not enough. A technical approach is not enough. We talk about deficits of local democracy, that we need to rebalance various mechanisms. Well, there are various political levels, spheres which must work together. And I would like to end on a positive note. You'll have noticed before that I like positive notes. And all this, of course, can only be done if we begin with an agreement on the sort of basic statement where we stand. If we do not agree on where we stand, it's going to be very difficult to offer a consistent political approach. But if we can agree on where we stand, and I think that's a European level, luckily enough, the Union is playing a very important role, which really is getting more and more people to agree on this statement of where we are. I went to a conference on energy recently, and I was frightened to see that those who are considered to be very conservative in our countries are sometimes viewed to be very progressive on a worldwide level, because at a worldwide level there is not this amount of consensus on where we stand. So at a global level, there's still a lot to do. But let me end on a positive note. The European Union, which is really very much at the vanguard of all this. Well, you can see at national level how important that is, because the union is the sort of baseline. It sets the starting point for us to find global approaches and global responses.
To the negative note that was sounded just a moment ago about engineers, Vicente, it falls to you to stand up for engineers. No, you needn't respond to that.
Yes, yes, of course. Engineers help to solve problems created by engineers. It's true, but if the problem is not created by the engineers, probably this society as we know it is not like this. It could be in a different way. So, in my view, we have, of course, to receive input from legislation, from funding institutions, but the right solution is the solution provided by engineers, sorry to say. I would like to raise a different point, very briefly, because I know we are practically on time, is that, as mentioned before, that not in my backyard have, in a certain extent, a positive extent, yes, elsewhere. But what about the costs? What about people know that those renewable energy, which is not placed in my backyard place, it needs feed-in tariffs, supports from the local governments, from the European government, to be installed. There was a study by Eurostat several years ago, a couple of years ago, no more, when the price of electricity was approximately 25% higher if renewable, 60% of the population declined this renewable aspect of the energy. So this is also something to be taken into account. Solar, wind, progressively less, but still, and CCS need support to be competitive. And this is a real challenge to be faced.
Excellent. You've widened our discussion out even further, and it now needs all the synthesis skills of Hans van der Loo to draw all the many threads together and make some sense of them from there. Do you want to speak from there, or do you?
Well, I presume
you've got the screen now, so you'll be fine.
That's right, and the camera is such that if I go and stand up somewhere, you know, people are looking at my belly. It's so I better stay seated, I suppose. Yep. I would like to thank all the panelists for the very pragmatic way that they've been tackling this topic, and I hope that that is particularly useful also for the many practitioners that are in the room, because we do have an unusual audience today. Un grand merci aussi à vous, Annabelle. I think indeed, you know, some thoughts. I think, you know, many people have spoken about the big two challenges of our time, that of resource demand growth and the climate stresses resulting from that. And we've been talking about NIMBYism. We've been talking a fair amount about CCS, and Eric, you will know it's not the NIMBYism, it is NUMBYism that applies, not under my backyard. And I think we've also been talking a lot about solutions, and I think there are three pillars of solutions that I've heard. One, of course, has got to do, if on the one hand you see this enormous resource demand growth, what can you do about demand management to reduce that? You know, energy efficiency has been named. Demand management and effect management. And I think, well, she left now, Edith Herzog says, you know, it's either low carbon or smarter, and indeed that is true. I think when you talk about low carbon alternatives for the energy that we still need to run this planet in the way we have it, I think there are also things that you can do with immediate effect. And actually this lady from Vienna referred to one as biogas, there's biomass, there's biofuels, and I agree, of course, with Andrea, it should be sustainable biofuels, because causing a new, bigger problem than the one you try to solve is not a solution. And I think we also have the relatively good news of the knowledge that we now may have 250 years more of gas as well. We talked about the need to cope with the increase of CO2 emissions that we still will see, that is emitted, so with the CCS, where the NUMBYism comes from. And perhaps you will allow me two more final thoughts, Tim, and that is one of speed and one of cost. I think to overcome that NIMBYism and NUMBYism, the Commission actually made a distinction between two technologies, and I thought they were quite insightful. One were those climate change mitigating technologies that do not require a lot of public persuasion, because if you put a cable under my garden or a pipeline I can't see or not overhead, you know, there's less resistance to it. And she made the distinction of those where you do need to do that. And on those two things, I wanted to say a few remarks. I think with the technologies that can be implemented with low resistance at great speed, they of course have the effect that they can contribute to the problem we're trying to tackle with more immediacy. And there's one point that and it's a pity that she's gone now, Edith spoke about the pension issue in wherever it was, Bulgaria or Romania, but many countries may face that. I think that we are now in a time where, as a result of the financial crisis, that governments feel in their coffers, that companies feel in their budgets, and that individual consumers feel in their wallets, I think we should give more attention to value for money considerations in achieving our targets. The objectives should not be negotiated down, they should stay as they are, but I think in this time of financial constraint we should be more aware of that as well, and so hence the thoughts about what can you do with gas, what can you do with biofuels, because they can perhaps be blended into the pool without having to convince people to the same extent as what you have to do something very big under their backyard or in their backyard. But we probably will have to do those things as well, and there we have to convince people. And I would like to end with what I think could be the new ABC that you've been describing for the future. I think the first one is the awareness of the problem that we have, and of course this is a very special room with very aware people. But the B is what Ron came up with, you know, the B is the bonus that we need in order to get these solutions accepted, but it's also the B from Andrea, you know, to build trust that we can do that, because you may have the awareness that perhaps CCS is necessary and forms of renewables that may be visual from your living room are necessary, but you will not really be persuaded to change your behavior and accept it unless there is a bonus or there is trust. And that is needed to make these choices that we have. And I think the gentleman here on the left, sorry I forgot your name, you made a point about the necessity of education in schools, and I couldn't agree more with that. And I have to say, I see some good signs there as well about young people doing things at school. They are certainly much more aware than I was 10, 15 years ago, so, but maybe I'm an extremely naive person, that is well possible. But I think education is indeed very important, A, to come up with new solutions, B, to represent the foundation of understanding why these technologies need to be deployed, and C, as a basis for future prosperity for Europe. Because we are not going to compete with China and India on low labor cost. We may perhaps compete by eco-innovations that later on we can also export. So thank you very much once again, because I thought this was a bit of an educational session as well. And I hope that this session did do its bit there. I know that normally I have to say, Tim, and I hope you can help me or somebody else from European Voice, that we're going to have drinks afterwards, but I do not know this building, so I don't know where the drinks are, but hopefully you will tell us that.
For some reason, the journalist can tell you about where the drinks are. I don't know why that is. Let me tell you first, before the information won't sink in, that the next debate in this series, the next Common Visions debate, will be on the 17th of November. So mark your diary accordingly, and if you're not on our mailing list, get on our mailing list.